What is up, guys? This is Oddjob Entertainment bringing you another video. And let me tell you, I've been fortunate as a creator to have a community that is widely very positive, intelligent, and courteous in their discourse. That's no better illustrated than with my previous video talking about PvP in Star Citizen and how it relates to cargo. If you haven't seen that video, I suggest you watch that first and then come back here because there was a lot of excellent discourse in the comments. So much so that I wanted to make this follow-up video. Today we're going to tackle a few topics. One, the last video focused on the how to increase player interactions. Today we'll look at the why. Two, that video also focused on increasing the rate of interactions without increasing the consequences for players engaging in piracy. So I also want to address some of the concerns in that vein. Three, I want to talk about more ideas to increase PvP likelihood that don't rely on industry players at all, as well as a broader scope of player interaction. First off, why should we get more PvP in Star Citizen? A simple answer would simply be that it doesn't occur enough to satiate PvP players. That doesn't mean anything though if you're an industry-focused player, and there's a lot more to it than that. With the still very recent introduction of master modes to the game, the entire meta has been turned on its head. As you've no doubt seen countless Spectrum threads, the change has been highly controversial. Regardless of where you stand on the issue, it seems Master Modes is here to stay. On its own, Master Modes demands a lot more data from the community to assist CIG in balancing the game. For instance, let's imagine you're flying a prospector on Daymar. Lo and behold, you're set upon by another pilot in an Arrow. Logically, your chances of winning in a dogfight are slim. They're in a dedicated light fighter, and you're in an industrial mining ship. The matchup couldn't be more unevenly matched, right? But does that mean you should die in 100% of these scenarios? No. There's a slight chance that you could win a dogfight, but there should be a fairly feasible chance that you can escape. The condition of your ship in either case, whether you flee or fight, largely comes down to balancing. Perhaps an industrial ship has a higher ratio of hull strength and shield pool health that makes it take longer for an arrow to bring you down. This would have a direct impact on whether or not you survive. With the sweeping changes brought about by Master Modes, getting details like that dialed in require these kinds of skirmishes to occur. Unfortunately, in many ways, Master Mode sets back any semblance of balance that we had in the game. Nothing interacts with each other the same. So we have to rebuild that dataset in a very strong sense. That's a big part of why we see so many changes happening in rapid succession, like the speeds for missiles as just one example among many others.
Yep, you guys take your time, enjoying the view, enjoying the scenery.
Let's imagine that CIG has a goal for 75% of prospector pilots to survive against an Arrow. The number is arbitrary, and it's just an example. But if you only have 4 skirmishes to pull data from, then you have a margin of error of 25%. If 2 mediocre pilots lose against Arrows and blow up, then you only have a 50% survival rate. But if 4 crack pilots survive these skirmishes, then you have a 100% survival rate. This means you get very dramatic swings in your data, and it's hard to extrapolate any useful information. In the first case, the prospector gets a dramatic buff to make it more viable in unexpected fights, and in the latter, it gets nerfed into oblivion. This is just one possible way that combat balancing impacts industrial players and illustrates why it is so important to get it right. Combat and flight characteristics are intrinsically tied to everything we do in-game. If instead you have a pool of 100 skirmishes to analyze, now your margin of error is just 1%. Making decisions about capacitor size, shield health, hull HP, and the many other variables to consider is a lot easier in that case. So if the community at large is dissatisfied with how a particular ship performs against another, then producing as much information as possible is in our best interest. Much of the more frustrating comments were such that I was trying to force PvP on players. And that was not the goal. My aim in the last video was to conceptualize bridges between players that could increase the likelihood of an interaction should they so choose. For instance, the mission ideas I put forward were within the context of a cargo trader accepting a high-risk mission. This would come with a substantial bump in reward and payout at the expense of a higher risk of piracy. It also adds a direct bridge between two styles of gameplay that typically try to avoid each other and otherwise have no real connection, that being PvP players and cargo trading. CIG has always stated that you can reduce your exposure to PvP, but not eliminate it entirely, so there will always be a low-level risk that you bump into pirates and murder hobos. In that case, I'd much rather have a balanced game that gives me options and a chance to survive. I also want the option of betting on myself and taking on higher risk for a greater reward. Both scenarios require more PvP than we currently experience to get to a point where a satisfying end is possible for all parties. While it may be painful for industry players to get ganked by PvP players, the light at the end of the tunnel is that we're producing data that makes these interactions less painful in the future. If ever there was a time to force PvP, it would certainly be now. The game is still in alpha, stakes are lower overall, and Master Modes is still fresh and in need of quite a bit of tuning. With a healthy enough dataset, forced PvP interactions become unnecessary, and the game could be allowed to shift back to a more PvE-friendly environment. Consider that much of the frustration industry players have may well come from the fact their ships are not well balanced to a hostile universe wherein PvP players do exist. I hope this makes it more clear that at least temporarily increasing PvP occurrences ultimately is better for everyone. Even if you never seek it out for yourself, having the sandbox balanced has intrinsic benefits for players of all types. The only way to get there is for PvP to happen with enough frequency to make well-informed balancing decisions. There were a number of viewers raising concerns about consequences for piracy players. It didn't fit within the scope of that video, so it was only briefly mentioned at all. But there is a lot of validity to these concerns, and I want to give them a more detailed treatment. Star Citizen at the moment has a bit in common with Kick. Just like with Kick, you can do any kind of deplorable activity and face little to no punishment for doing so. Piracy definitely falls into this category. I don't think any pirate players are going to be offended by saying that they're deplorable people, because that's what they're going for. The difference is, of course, Star Citizen is a game, so while Kick streamers are a cancer on society, pirates are a danger only within the context of a game. And another major difference is that while Kick streamers flaunt their avoidance of consequences, pirates are begging for punishment and not getting it anyway. A lot of what piracy is today is simply racking up a crime stat in the hope of attracting any kind of attention. Currently, this is one of the more sure ways to ensure you get your PvP fix. Unfortunately, this means making yourself a nuisance to the whole server while you try to increase your crime stat and get bounty hunters chasing you. Most players on the server are just fodder at that point because odds are the pirate has a lot more PvP experience than the players just trying to leave a station. Providing structured ways for players to easily engage with each other reduces the likelihood that pirates resort to murder hobo activities at our station. If pirates are currently looking for action and punishment, that's what you need to give them. In a high security system like Stanton, why is it that pirates have such an easy time jumping from point to point and not having to face justice for their crimes? The last video laid out a framework where cargo missions would be tied to piracy counterparts. In that, I mentioned that the pirates need to work quickly as UEE law enforcement would not be far behind. The problem is, that doesn't happen currently. The UEE doesn't chase you down, it maybe sends bounty hunters after you if you hit a crime stat 3, and there's bounty hunters willing to take you on. The only other real punishment is that it doesn't let you land at certain stations. Are either of those really enough punishment? Probably not. We know that CIG has the capability to have NPCs pull players out of quantum travel, and quantum travel at the moment is a very safe place for pirates. Should it be? Just like we set up roadblocks in real life, can't we set up a similar kind of roadblock for pirates? If you have a crime stat and you're going between planets, can't we have the pirate have a high chance of getting pulled out of quantum and then have to take on a detachment of UEE Navy? If you just killed a player, now you get to take on a Hammerhead and a couple of Scorpius Antares and the Mantis that just caught you. Pirates want the action, so give it to them. At the moment, the only interdictions that happen are from outlaws in the system, and these are most likely to impact cargo traders. In a high security system like Stanton, it should be the reverse. Make it so. Additionally, reputation is not nearly leveraged enough. If O.J. Simpson walked into my store wanting to buy a Bowie knife, I would be inclined to refuse service, especially if he were trying to buy gloves at the same time. That reference may be a little dated for younger viewers, but hopefully it brings a smile to the space dads out there. Likewise in Star Citizen, if a known dilettante of all things piracy walks into Tammany and Sons, it stands to reason they would be limited to buying a water bottle. If this kind of player wants to protect themselves or deal some damage, they'd need to go to less scrupulous retailers. This would be another way to funnel these players to places like Grimhex, where no doubt the bounty hunters are also lying in wait. Alternatively, they jump to their friends in Dead Space who are willing to sell them stockpiles of guns. In either scenario, it's now a lot harder to be a pirate in a lawful system. Yet another point of interest is that Stanton is not really living up to the higher security system it is supposed to be. For a long time, the reasoning has been that it's the only system in the game. Therefore, all of its characteristics have to be averaged out until the game can expand to allow that kind of diversification. But this runs counter to what piracy players are actually asking for. They're looking for higher thrills and action, so making it harder on them now is again in their best interest too. So why not have a larger security presence at each orbital station? If there were a standing hammerhead each time you showed your face, regardless of your crime stat, that would do a lot to protect the lawful players and at the same time give pirates something to play with. Server performance may be an issue, and we'd need better ways to clean up the airspace around stations of all the hammerhead corpses, but this would be a good deterrent. This is only a slight change from what we have now because the UEE does show up based on your crime stat. I'm simply saying that they should be an ever-present danger for pirates. Between these three measures, pirates would have both a harder existence and one that is more satisfying in our solitary system. So to recap, cut off sales from legal vendors to players with crime stats for everything but survival essentials, have the UEE be more present as a threat to unlawful players, and have criminals be highly likely to get engaged by quantum roadblocks anytime they use one of the longer QT lanes. Next, I want to talk about ways to get more PvP occurring without involving PvE players at all. See, there's players like myself who would like to engage in PvP, but I don't want to get my hands dirty with a crime stat, and the barrier to entry is high. It's lower in a lot of ways with master modes, but some elements haven't changed. For instance, if I don't want a crime stat, I still need to know how to track bounty targets, and I need them to not combat log when I finally find them. While there are a number of experts out there, figuring out this aspect is very difficult to a novice like myself. I need a way to get into PvP without getting a crime stat, and without needing all these other requisite skills when my real intention is training in dogfighting. Now I can already hear the keyboards going. Arena Commander, right? Well, no. Arena Commander is great for what it is, but it still leaves a lot to be desired. For one, it's not a one-to-one experience of what you see in the persistent universe. You don't have ammo pickups when you kill targets in the PU. If you blow up, you have to get back to the site, which could take half an hour instead of just respawning at the edge of the map. In this sense and many others, it lacks the weight of consequence that only comes from taking the risk in the persistent universe. So what's the solution? Well, I propose that Star Citizen needs Fight Club. You sign up, put your name down as someone openly inviting PvP, and there's no chance of a crime stat between two willing participants as so defined. For bonus points, if CIG finally gets around to implementing proper leaderboards, then you could specifically seek out rivals, players close to your standing on the board. A good example of this concept is actually the rivals races in Forza Horizon. Each week, there's a new track with a set loadout and car. You do your first clean lap to get your initial placement, and then you keep racing ghosts of the players surrounding you on the leaderboard as you attempt to get better. On screen, you see me doing my initial placement compared to my final lap of the day. The times are significantly improved, and this is because having a rival means I can see how they move and set up their lines. I can compare my approaches to the turns and exploit weaknesses to get out ahead of them. While I'm certainly not the best racer in the world, there's a dramatic rate of improvement being shown here. And I would think the same would apply in PvP combat. Pitting someone like me against Avenger 1 is a good example of a blood sacrifice to an eldritch god of thrust. But pitting me against the next lowest noob on the totem pole means I have a fighting chance of actually getting better. Likewise, for the top 1%ers of the PvP community, this gives them a way to find each other in the verse and keep improving themselves as well. To further flesh out the idea here, you could have designated arenas, so to speak, in the PU, as well as give these players mutual god markers so long as they have their invitation open for combat challengers. Ideally, if you loiter in an arena zone, there'd be a nearby respawn clinic and ASOP terminal to get back in just a little faster should you lose. If CIG wanted to mimic the fixed setup idea from Forza, they could have a ship rental kiosk at this station that rents out only the ship loadout of the week. So one week it might be a Gladius with all scatterguns, and the next it could be an F8 with ballistic repeaters. Since everything in Star Citizen needs to have some kind of lore justification, the reasoning could simply be that this is an initiative to improve the combat effectiveness of the civilian defense force by encouraging open training among CDF participants. As with all my ideas, I'm not so sure as to say that this is what must be done, but having an in-universe Fight Club equivalent seems like an obvious addition that I'm sure CIG has already considered at some point. I also think it's entirely possible to implement it without undercutting the importance of Arena Commander as a testing platform. Having a reputation tree to grind out also gives players rewards that are frankly lacking in Arena Commander currently, and keeps things true to the persistent experience that players expect. I'd certainly like to see people's thoughts on this idea though. You know what to do down in the comments. Finally, I want to talk about player interactions in a broader scope. My last video focused mostly on PvP interactions, and indeed that's probably the most common kind of player interaction in Star Citizen today. But it's certainly not the only type that is possible. With a little bit of stretching, CIG could encourage player collaboration on much grander scales than what we see currently. I did a video that talks about some of the things needed for org gameplay to really be a thing, and I'll refer you back to that video for additional thoughts. To summarize it here, we need org tools to exist in-game. The comms tab at the moment is one of the weakest elements of Star Citizen for a number of reasons. First off, there's no way to access the chat history. This is an issue even from a player's safety perspective because if someone is harassing you or making violent threats, there's no way to go back and capture it if it's gone past already. This also makes it harder to report those users currently spamming chat with links and advertisements that seems to be happening more recently. Org communication currently happens strictly outside of the game through Discord and Spectrum. But why can't we have persistent chats in games with friends, party members, and organizations? The number of times I've had to resend a Discord link because someone lost sight of it is extremely frustrating. But would I even need to send a Discord link in the first place if comms worked reliably and were easier to use? Another simple feature would be to make it such that I can join the server on org members without needing them to be a friend of mine. I already put in the work to find the org of like-minded people. Why do I need to fight Star Citizen's clunky UI to play with those people? Star Citizen did make a big step forward by implementing the guide system for newer players, but we're still missing some key features that I feel would make it much better. First off, expanding the feature set of this part of the site to be more of an LFG would pull seasoned players to the site more often. This, I'm sure, would have knock-on effects by getting eyes on player requests for guides. Getting your veterans to see these requests gets more people playing with each other. It would also just make it easier to find people to connect with. If I could simply create a group titled Crewing Argo Mole for Mining that shows how many slots I've yet to fill, it'd be a lot easier to get my ship filled. Right now, I jump from server to server in Discord to see if there's any groups I can join, and I beg in global chat to see if anyone is interested. Destiny 2 has had this feature for a long time. Aside from my friend Slooty, who was the one that got me into the game before he yeeted himself out of it, that's how I've made all my friends in that game. I join LFGs for raids and make lasting connections with the people in these groups. Destiny doesn't even have the best version of this feature. There's pros and cons to the systems many other games have, but even a baseline implementation would do an incredible amount of work towards pushing players together in the verse. This would also be a great way of getting a sense of public-facing reputation. If I invite a player onto my mole and they end up shooting me when my back is turned, giving them a 1-star rating might warn other players to avoid team-based activities with this player. And there could be a litany of other criteria for evaluations as well. The crux of the issue is this: without meaningful ways to pull players together for both positive and negative experiences, the game will not live up to its MMO aspirations and will fail to be the living universe we were promised. Server meshing will help, but if there's 1,000 players in my shard and I still don't see any of them, I'll still be alone. With the constant changes from this game being an alpha and not yet knowing its own identity, we need more player interactions to get to a balanced state. This does include significantly increasing the amount of PvP, even if it means doing so artificially. There's no better time than now to do that, as balancing decisions become much more difficult down the road when buried under ever-increasing layers of abstraction. There's a number of ways to boost these numbers, and one of them is potentially the Star Citizen Fight Club. We also do need to make the life of a pirate feel like a pirate. Scruffy-looking nerf herders should feel the weight of being a scoundrel, stop them in quantum travel, and make them fight it out when they flee the scene of a crime. And we can also try to push players of differing gameplay styles together for critical data about the outcomes. Finally, we really do need ways to get players playing with each other. This is a multiplayer game. You're supposed to bump into each other. That can be for skirmish, but it can also be to hang out busting rocks. Without ways to bring players close, our multi-crew ships are just big solo ships. Ladies and gentlemen, like, share, comment, subscribe, do all the YouTube things, and until next time, this is Odd Job Entertainment, signing off.